Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
What you know, good and camp, you're listening to the AND Campaign's Church Politics Podcast with Justin Giboney, a.k.a. Bishop Cooper's grandson, and the Windy City representative, the baddest brother above the Mason-Dixon line, my play cousin, the Right Reverend Christopher Butler. Now, you guys know that the AND Campaign and the hosts of the Church Politics Podcast do not endorse candidates on the podcast or within our capacity as, members of the AND Campaign, okay? But we can celebrate certain candidates. And so I want to do that today. I want to celebrate our good friend, Dr. Jaha Howard, who made it into the runoff in the Cobb County Commission District 2 Democratic primary. And he didn't just make it into the runoff, he made it into the runoff with the most votes. And so it looks like he's in good position to get that position, to win that seat. But I really want to shout him out because we know that, especially when you're running in a progressive place like the metro area of Atlanta, sometimes it can be difficult to be a Orthodox Christian and run. There are all kind of toils and snares set up, just like there's some toils and snares set up for a black man who may be running in the Republican primary who has our kind of point of view. So I want to give a shout out to him because while he is very intent on representing everybody and loving those and caring for those who he may have, theological disagreements with, it says a lot that he's in the position that he's in, and he's been willing to be thoroughly Christian all the way through it. And so I just want to give him a shout out. I think he may have won church folk champ before, but certainly will say, man, we appreciate you. And, I hope everything goes well as his family goes through this process of what will be a very interesting runoff. Anything you want to add to that, Chris?
Yeah, like you said, we don't endorse candidates, but we do love good people. Dr. Howard is good people. I'm talking about somebody who just takes the kind of compassion and conviction framework that we talk about, and he lives it out in his public life. And what I love about seeing him win elections is that it demonstrates that this is part of what it means to really be a faithful Christian in the public square, is that ability to represent the entire community, to listen to people who may not come from your same faith background, but then also be able to bring those ideas and values that you do embrace, bring them with courage and conviction into the space. And he just does that so well. And it's so exciting to see him in pole position. Obviously, the runoff has not taken place yet. So, pray for Dr. Howard and, like you said, pray for his family. I've run for office. I know that can be a grueling experience, but really excited for you. So this is good AND campaign news.
Yeah, very good AND campaign news. And let him just be an example to you that you don't have to throw away your convictions or your compassion to run for office. And when he, and again, he's still got to go into the runoff. But let me say this. One of the folks who didn't make it into the runoff is actually a state representative. So this was a very competitive race. It's still going to be a competitive race, but we wanted to make sure that we gave our friend a shout out for making it to this position. And it should be a pretty interesting runoff. That said, Chris, we got to go back to the usual, which is a shout out to all our patrons and supporters for supporting us in what we do and how we do it. This is not your average podcast. Me and Chris are not going to run away from the hard issues. We're not going to let our peers create standards and rules and tell us what we can and cannot say. right? Now, we're always going to be compassionate. We're always going to try to season our words with salt. But we want to make sure that we're representing Orthodox Christians who want to get politics right in the best way. And that means we have to address issues that aren't always smiled upon in pop culture. Okay, that maybe, some folks who don't like justice who don't want to talk about morality are going to shy away from. And so we appreciate you in realizing this. And so anyone who is one of our patrons has gone to patreon.com/churchpolitics and is giving us, $5 or, $50 a month. You matter to us and we greatly appreciate you. And just so you know, if you're not one of our patrons, then you're not getting some of our premium episodes that our patrons get. So for instance, on this premium episode, we'll be talking about the rules that have been laid out for the Biden-Trump debates. Are these rules democratic? Are these rules unfair in any way? That'll be the conversation that we're having on there, and our patrons will be able to get that. So consider supporting us. If you do support us, thank you. We appreciate you. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you like and subscribe so we can get a handle on this. The way that all these, to make sure that our videos and all that stuff pop up. What's the word I'm looking for, Chris? The algorithm. The algorithm, yes. Like and subscribe so we can get on top of this algorithm. But y'all know what it is. Grab your Bible, get your mind right, and prepare to think not like a Democrat, not like a Republican, but to think like a Christian. And today I want to start off in Proverbs. Let me go to Proverbs 11:14. And it says, "Where no counsel is, the people fall. But in the multitude of counselors, there is safety." This is King Solomon providing us with general wisdom and offering his son, Prince Rehoboam, more specific advice as he prepared to inherit the crown. We should know that our leadership will not succeed if we're averse to counsel. And if we're adverse to counsel and we're leading people, those people will suffer. We are not omniscient. We don't know everything. A leader that refuses counsel or doesn't have prudent counsel is headed for failure. Which brings us to former President Trump. Former President Trump's New York case has recently been focused on the cross-examination of his former counsel, who is Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen, who was Trump's counsel, maybe should have had more judicious counselors for his own affairs. So we have a counselor who needed counseling, and it's led to a very interesting situation, to say the least, Chris. Now, recall that in this case, prosecutors allege that Trump, via Cohen, made hush payments to Stormy Daniels after an affair. They're saying for campaign purposes, right? The payment was for campaign purposes. But after repaying Cohen, Trump falsified 34 different records to make it appear that the payment was for legal fees to avoid a kind of campaign financing violation. You can't use campaign funds to do something like that. But he was saying that that payment was for something else. Again, Chris, this is a complete mess.
Yeah.
All right. According to Yahoo News, during cross-examination of Cohen, Cohen admitted under oath to stealing from the Trump organization, pocketing part of an amount included in his $420,000 reimbursement. And that payment was actually, part of that reimbursement was actually supposed to go to a tech firm that rigged online polls in favor of Trump. So you have an admission of theft. You have the revelation that part of his reimbursement was actually supposed to go to an organization that was rigging online polls. That's a lot, Chris. Now, in addition to that, Trump's defense team called a lawyer named Robert Costello to the stand. Now, this lawyer apparently was one of Cohen's advisors. So maybe he did have some counsel, right? Costello testified that Cohen told him numerous times, and that's a quote, that Trump didn't know anything about the hush money payment, right? Now, in campaigns, right, there is a thing called plausible deniability, right? And so some campaign professionals would try to hide something like this from the principal or from the candidate so that they could deny it later on, that they didn't have anything to do with it, okay? Um, there are some counselors who handle things in that way for their candidates. Am I correct, Chris?
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
So that wouldn't be unheard of, right? So this Costello guy says numerous times Cohen tells him that Trump knew nothing about the payment. Now, speaking of counsel, when in regard to this whole case, Chris, I've said a number of times that I think prosecutor Alvin Bragg should have had better counsel himself before he actually brought this case.
Yeah.
Okay. I think this is one of the weaker cases against Trump and actually hurts the other cases just by I think because this case seems so much of like a politically motivated, that's what I'm looking for, that it actually could hurt the other cases. All right. And it's not that Trump didn't do anything wrong, in my opinion here, right? But prosecuting this case, in trying to prosecute this case, I think there was a stretch in prosecutorial discretion. Not that they couldn't bring it or was wrong, but things like expanding or finding ways to kind of expand the statute of limitations. And there have been progressive and conservative legal analysts that just said this probably didn't have to be brought forward, right? I wouldn't say it's a consensus, but there's been a lot of people who have said that. All right. And the crazy part is your star witness is Cohen, right? And one CNN commentator basically said that Cohen, him stealing money and admitting stealing the money on the witness stand is actually worse than the charges against Trump. Yeah. So you're depending on the word of someone who has already been found to have lied to Congress, right? Mm-hmm. Cohen also recently, a federal judge said that Cohen was citing, actually in one of his briefs, Cohen was citing fake cases that were generated by AI.
Yeah.
He was so what happens when you write a brief? You have to cite other cases. Mm-hmm. Well, he didn't write the brief. He depended on AI to write the brief, and AI just made up cases that weren't even real, right? I mean, if that's who you're depending on to make your case, you're in trouble. Yeah. Then, in addition to that, the same judge suggested that Cohen may have committed perjury during his testimony in President Trump's civil fraud case last year. Just a bad situation. We don't know what Trump knew. We're talking about counsel. So do this for me, Chris. Could you briefly talk about the importance of counsel and then go into this case dealing with Trump and the star witness who was his former counsel?
Yeah. I mean, I think that counsel obviously is very important. Especially I will say legal counsel is very important. What did they say? The person who is representing himself in court has an idiot for a client. And so this inability to really look into this. I mean, Trump had Cohen for counsel, and I mean, according to Cohen's testimony, he dealt with issues. I mean, not all above board or in ways that I would approve, but he was dealing with issues. And Trump's current counsel advised him to stay off the stand, and he was able to take that. I think, like you, in this case, the counsel that concerns me the most and who needs to maybe think about different counsel is the person who is supposed to be the people's counsel and discern on behalf of the state what issues get prosecuted in court and which ones don't. And I think that this case, it may not be a consensus, but it is, like you said, a widely held belief. And I think it is just accurate when you look at the case, that this is politically motivated. It looks like a political witch hunt. It feels like a political witch hunt. Um, you know, I pulled up from the opening statements in the entire case. And this was something that took my notice back when they started the case off. They opened the case and say that, this is a quote from the opening statements. This was coordinated, long-running conspiracy to influence the 2016 election to help Donald Trump get elected through illegal expenditures, to silence people who had something bad to say about his behavior, using doctored corporate records and bank forms to conceal those payments along the way. It was election fraud, pure and simple. Problem is, Trump is not charged with election fraud, right? Like, that's not the case that you have to prosecute here. And it seems like they were so desperate to prosecute the case that nobody stopped to ask Michael Cohen if he was actually stealing some of the money that was being paid. So it just seems, I'm not a lawyer, you are, but it seems like sloppy management here. And so it is, it's one of those things. And I've kind of held this the whole time. They essentially, and you maybe can clarify this even more for our listeners, but they essentially took a Class A misdemeanor of falsifying documents under the state, and then said that he was doing this to cover up another Class A misdemeanor, but by putting them together, they make it into a felony in the state courts. From everything I've read, it's a novel application of the law, and it is, to me, like, you need legal clarity from the legal system. There are other places throughout our civil society where we need moral clarity, but the legal system is not necessarily the place to moralize, right? Like, it's much more technical, and you need legal clarity in the legal system. And hush money for illicit sex acts is completely unseemly, in my opinion. And as somebody whose day job is to provide moral clarity, I will say that is unseemly. But it is not illegal, and it seems like this prosecution is not providing good counsel on behalf of the people.
I couldn't agree with you more, man. This case, there were all kind of legal maneuvers used to make this fit, to try to make this stick. And I think that's the whole point. When a prosecutor bends over backwards to make a case, especially for someone in such a high political position, it looks politically motivated. And like I said before, it almost stains some of the other cases, and we'll talk about one of those next, which I think are better cases.
Yeah.
Right. And it actually hurts all of them that this one was brought first and really brought it all.
Yeah.
And so, again, a waste of resources. I don't know that the people being led here by the prosecutor are going to fall and it'll destroy the city, but it's certainly a bad look. And I think at a time when people have a lack of trust in any institution, including our legal system, I would have stayed away from something like this. Because all these cases coming at once was just a bad look, even though I think some of them are substantive. So this is not to say that Trump is not guilty of any of them. He's innocent until proven guilty. But I think some of the other ones have or at least had a better chance. Anything else, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I do just want to say on that score of bringing this case first, I do think that it'll ultimately backfire on Bragg, right? Who wanted to bring this case to sort of be the undoing of Donald Trump. But if anything, it has it sort of played into his hands, because what he has tried to do is put every legal case against him in the category of a political witch hunt. And the last thing you want to do with somebody who's using that kind of defense in the court of public opinion is to actually give them a real, actual political witch hunt where you're using lawfare to try to accomplish a political outcome.
And up until this point, I don't think his support has gone down. It may be an argument that it's actually gone up.
Yeah.
So, all right, we will be right back on the Church Politics Podcast.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up, but with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
And we are back on the Church Politics Podcast. As you heard, we were just talking about prosecutor Alvin Bragg and the case that he's brought against Donald Trump. But that's not the only case. There's actually a case here in Georgia that's been brought against Trump, to be more specific, in Atlanta. And that case was brought by Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis. Now, I'm going to keep it real. For those of you who have been listening to this show for a while, you know that I was a really big fan of Fani Willis. I said it, I think, multiple times, that I appreciated the way that she was bringing some really strong cases. Number one, against Trump. I thought it was a case that has merit. And she was also bringing some very strong RICO cases against gangs that were terrorizing Atlanta. I thought she did a very good job. I think she was aggressive as a prosecutor, but not overly aggressive. I didn't think any of the cases that she brought were a reach. I thought they needed to be brought. I thought somebody needed to say something, and she did a good job in bringing those. All right. That said, as wrong as it looks like Trump was in this case, and just recall, this is the case where Trump basically called the Secretary of State of Georgia and say, hey, I need you to get me those votes. And there's some other things that go into it as well with him and his co-defendants. So as wrong as he was for that, innocent and proven guilty, but based on what I've heard from the audio that they have of that call, seems like he was pretty wrong to me, and that it wasn't legal. So as wrong as that was, I can't help but say, if I'm going to be honest, that she was also wrong, and that she jeopardized this very important case based on her relationship with her special counsel. And you guys have heard all the details. I'm not going back into the details. But I have to say that prosecutors have probably the highest standard of ethics, right? Because they're going after people, they're prosecuting people, and can take away their freedom. So ethics, when it comes to prosecutors, is no joke, okay? When it comes to the money and where the money went and was it paid back, it wasn't on her to necessarily prove that, but in my eyes and watching those hearings, some of that was far from believable. Okay? I'll let you guys make your decisions there. But I also didn't appreciate, and here's where my bigger issue came from, and where I kind of fell out of love with somebody who I respect professionally. I didn't appreciate how the moral authority of the church was used to counter the criticism of her actions. Now, was some of that criticism partisan? Yes. Was some of that criticism unfair, and were there personal attacks in it? Yes, some of it was. But there was still something done wrong. So not all of the criticism was wrong, and I don't think the church should be used to cover that up. Now, she's certainly redeemable. I wish her the best. We've all fallen short, so this isn't about talking about how bad Fani Willis is. But covering such malfeasance is not what the church is for. And I didn't appreciate how the church was used in that manner, right? The churches should be about transformation, truth, and grace. And so since I have praised her so highly in the past, it's important that I be honest about the issues that I have with some of the things it looks like she did in the present. Okay. Now, she just was in, with all that stuff that was going on and the Trump case and, the potential ethics violations that she was being accused of, she had a race to run. And so one of the big questions, Chris, was, is what's going on in this case going to affect her? And the people of Fulton County, at least the Democrats in Fulton County, said absolutely not. She routed her opponent in Fulton County. I want to say she was at 80. Last time I looked, she was at 80-something% of the vote. So it wasn't even close. All right. I think part of the reason is, Chris, this became very partisan, right? And I think the people around Fani Willis, I want to say District Attorney Willis, made it very partisan. It was her against Trump. And when it's you against someone that almost all Democrats in Fulton County really, really dislike, maybe disliked more than anybody almost in the world, that's going to be good for you as a candidate, right? Because it became very partisan. And so she won that. In November, she will, be in the race against a Republican. But again, this is Fulton County, and it looks like she will win. I'm not saying that she shouldn't have. That was for the voters to decide. But they came through for her in a big way. The other person that had a race going on was the judge. So I'm going to tell you this, as an attorney, as a person, as somebody who has judges who are my friends, that the position that he was placed in by all this back and forth, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But Scott McAfee, in my opinion, may not have been perfect, but I thought he handled himself very well given the circumstances. This is the prosecution of a president. Then you not as that's hard enough, but then you have a prosecutor who comes up on some allegations and you have to fix that. He did what he could. He's supposed to be the referee. He's not supposed to control everything, but I thought that he handled himself well given the circumstances. He also wins. He actually wins his race, which will give him another full term. The other last shout I want to give, I know there's been a lot of shout outs coming on this episode, but I want to give a shout out to Fred Hicks, who ran McAfee's campaign. Fred Hicks is a good friend of mine. We have run campaigns together in the city of Atlanta. So shout out to you, Fred Hicks, on this win. Chris, what are your thoughts on Fani and then going to McAfee and how all this worked out in their races?
Yeah, I think there were two things I see. One encourages me, the other one not so much. Because when I look at the outcome of these races, I'll do the bad first, right? You see the real power of identity politics and sort of partisanship and in elections, right? It sucks, I think, but there are too many cases in which we just feel like we gotta back our sister and our brother's play. So if you got somebody who seems to be under attack, and especially if they are, they look like us, they're from the community, and we feel like we just gotta back them up and go, cast our ballot to get the black person in, get the person who looks like us.
Yeah. And even if you back them up, here's my issue, not to cut you off, but even if you back them up, there has to be an acknowledgement of the wrong that was done.
Yeah.
Not just a defense, because it wasn't just Republicans out to get her. Although the Republicans were out to get her, she gave them an opportunity.
Gave them a real opportunity to do it. And
I didn't see an acknowledgement of that.
Yeah, and I agree that the church should be one of the sort of bulwarks against that instinct not to do the accountability piece, because we kind of feel like it's going to jeopardize the position too much. The church should be one of the institutions that is standing with that kind of moral clarity and saying, no, we have to do this because it is the right thing to do. Now, I will say, as much as I don't like identity politics, lest anybody clip and share this out of context, I always add, when I talk about identity politics, that we didn't start this fire. When it comes to identity politics, that is something that grows out of not giving certain groups of people a real seat at the table. And so, we didn't start this fight, but I'm still not a huge fan of it. But the flip side of the coin is that you also see the power of local politics, right? Because I do think that a part of the huge win that Willis won on yesterday has something to do with the things that you talked about in the beginning of the segment, with her, doing some things that I think a lot of people really do appreciate as a prosecutor. As you said, being aggressive, but not too aggressive, using the office to combat crime and try to hold people accountable for wrongdoing. Even former President Donald Trump, right? They're, I was so disappointed, so unbelievably disappointed when everything started to come out about the relationship with the guy who's running the case, because this is one of those things, and we just talked about, the case that I think is complete nonsense. But at the same time, if you're messing around in local elections and trying to get people to change vote counts and all those types of things, like those, protecting our elections is like one of the most important things that we can do under the law. So even bringing an investigation and a case against the former president, as huge as that is and as much political impact as that has, I think it's important for a zealous prosecutor who sees inside of her jurisdiction that the integrity of elections is perhaps being compromised, to bring that case. So I think some of the win has to do with that kind of partisanship and that identity politics response, but some of it probably has to do also with the larger record and the experience of people in the community. So I guess it's two sides of the coin. One I'm not a huge fan of, but one I see a thread of something that could be encouraging.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think when she started off, the beginning of her tenure, I thought she was fair. I thought she was zealous, as a prosecutor should be, but she was fair, and so that's what I really appreciated about it. I don't want anybody just trying to get anybody into jail they can. I thought she went about it in a prudent way, but also a principled way. Now, I'll say this too, Chris, especially when it comes to the Black community. I understand the response.
Yeah.
Right. Even if I don't totally agree with it, in my community, I understand the response because Black people historically have been used to their leaders being treated very poorly.
Yeah.
Whether it's being murdered, whether it's coming up on all type of false allegations, that is not something that the Black community hasn't seen happen before.
Yeah.
And so because of that, when it seems like white society is accusing a Black leader of something, we automatically are very skeptical.
Yes.
And I think that skepticism is understandable, right?
Yep.
Because of the history. But I don't think that justifies that skepticism causing us to say, you know what, I'm not going to look at what was done wrong at all or acknowledge it.
Especially in the church.
Exactly. That's where I find the issue. So while it's understandable to a certain extent, I think in this case, it's not justifiable. Now, again, that's not the whole Black community. There's a lot of people in the Black community that felt just like we felt. Hey, she's doing a great job. I'm glad she's prosecuting Trump. He was wrong on this. I'm glad she prosecuted the gangs. They were wrong on that. But I still know a lot of Black people who will say that, but also say that was an unforced error.
Yeah.
It was wrong. The idea that she paid him back but didn't have any receipts just didn't make any sense to me. That was being called out, right? But the popular narrative, right, I think, and the one that you were hearing was, hey, it's her against Trump, and Trump is so bad that regardless of what she did, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I don't think as Christians we can take that point of view. I guess that's where I'm coming out. And the other thing is, nobody's saying that the churches should have kicked her out or they shouldn't have prayed. If they would have brought her up and prayed for her and stuff like that, cool. But when people are allowed to kind of push propaganda or make their case, which isn't completely honest necessarily in the church, I think that's a problem. So for me, this is more of a defense of the church and saying what we should be about and how we should correct this rather than just coming at her. But I do think she was wrong, and that needs to be said.
Yeah, no, for sure. And to the extent of her being a a really professional and competent prosecutor, there's still a chance that she gets pulled from the case, right? And
Right.
not so that it
Yes.
compromises the actual prosecution, right? So it's
Yeah.
it's so accurate to describe it as an unforced error.
The
and
review of her
widely
ethics and
disproportionate.
professionalism has gone to the Georgia Court of Appeals. So McAfee sent it to the Court of Appeals, which means she and her whole office could still be pulled off the case. She really put this case in a very shaky situation.
Yeah.
Right. But we'll be I think both. I think if you want to say if you're going to say your prayers tonight, I would add Cohen to those prayers, whether you like him or not. Michael Cohen. I would add Fani Willis to those prayers. Right. We're not just praying for people we think who are right always. I think these are people, because I can imagine Michael Cohen. He has to be in a just like life has to just be coming at him very quickly, and it's hard to put this all together. And the same thing for Fani Willis. And I'm not comparing the two. I'm just saying these are two people who may need our prayers because they're in tough situations. And for Fani, she still has a job to do.
Yep.
She still has other cases to prosecute. She still has an office to run, and I hope she's able to do that in a just way, like I think she was doing prior to all this other stuff coming out.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, we will be right back on the Church Politics Podcast.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up, but with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
And we are back on the Church Politics Podcast. All right, this is kind of deep, Chris. The International Criminal Court is a court that basically investigates where warranted. Well, let me just read from their site on who they say they are. All right. The International Criminal Court investigates and where warranted, tries individuals charged with the gravest crimes of concern to the international community: genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the crimes of aggression. Okay. This international court is seeking arrest warrants against not only the leadership of Hamas, but also the leadership of Israel, including Bibi Netanyahu. All right. Now, I went and looked at the statement from the International Criminal Court and their prosecutor who wants to bring these charges. And here's what it says. All right. On the basis of evidence collected and examined by my office, I have reasonable grounds to believe that the leadership of Hamas, I'm not going to say all the names, bears criminal responsibility for the following war crimes and crimes against humanity committed on the territory of Israel and the state of Palestine in the Gaza Strip from starting on October 7th, 2023. And here's the list of crimes: extermination as a crime against humanity, murder as a crime against humanity contrary to international law, and war crimes contrary to the same international law, taking hostages as a war crime, rape and other acts of sexual violence as crimes against humanity, torture as a crime against humanity, other inhumane acts as crimes against humanity, cruel treatment as a war crime, and outrages upon personal dignity as a war crime. Okay, those are the charges against Hamas. Here's the other one. On the basis of evidence collected and examined by my office, I have reasonable grounds to believe that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and Yoav Gallant, the Minister of Defense of Israel, bear criminal responsibility for the following war crimes and crimes against humanity committed on the territory of the state of Palestine in the Gaza Strip. And they said these started on October 8th, 2003. Here they are. Starvation of civilians as a method of warfare as a crime against humanity. Intentionally directing attacks against civilian populations as a war crime. Extermination and or murder contrary to international law. Prosecution as a crime against humanity and other inhumane acts as crimes against humanity contrary to international law. Man, that's heavy. Obviously, the response from Netanyahu was outrage. Outrage was also shown by President Joe Biden, who said, who called the arrest warrants outrageous and said that there is no equivalence, none, between Israel and Hamas. Chris, when you hear about these charges, what were your thoughts, man? I mean, this is a big deal.
Yeah, I think it's a big deal. It certainly, it puts Netanyahu and the administration in Israel right now and into further isolation in the international community. Do I think that there's like a ton of risk that like they're gonna go to jail? Probably not. The ICC does not have any police power, but it could make things difficult. Like you have seen a couple of states come out and recognize Palestine as a state. You've seen even, I think, the Brits in their statement, they said, like, we don't think this should happen, but if it does, we will have to execute the arrest if one of these folks comes into our territory. So it isolates the administration. It puts, you just, like, we both like sports. There are certain lists that you don't want to be on. Like, you don't want to be like the person with the most turnovers. And this puts Benjamin Netanyahu's name, if this warrant actually is issued, puts his name on the list with like Putin and Gaddafi and like just folks who you don't want to be on the list with. So I think this is really bad. I do think that our president of the United States just handled this in a really bad way. I think over the next couple of days and weeks, that you're going to see that Biden's response to this is like somewhere between a big problem and an unmitigated disaster. And I do think, Justin, as I thought about this, what the president is dealing with is something. I think this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? So he goes to Morehouse and he says that, like, I'm calling for an immediate ceasefire, except for you're not calling for an immediate ceasefire, and your administration is consistently blocking.
Immediate and permanent is what the young man said.
Right. So, but then the president's like, yeah, but I'm calling for a ceasefire. Not really. And then he says, like, I'm going to condition military aid, but then you send military aid even after Israel violates your condition. And then he says, like, I support a two-state solution, but he backs an administration that openly pledges that they will never support a Palestinian state, no matter how long they live. And he says that he supports, now the so-called international rules-based order, but when the ICC makes a decision that he doesn't like, well, it's an outrage. We're not going to like acknowledge it. And I think that when you look at this, you might be tempted to say that, like, people care so much about Israel-Palestine, and that issue is pushing people away from Biden. And for sure, there are certain people who care a lot about this. But I think for a lot of people, this is a catalyst for something that goes a little bit deeper, where Biden is getting worse outcomes on this issue, even than like Trump or RFK Jr., who pretty much have the same Israel policy that he does. But I think for a lot of folks, this rhythm that Biden has of saying one thing and doing another is really exacerbating something that he's been dealing with throughout his entire presidency, which is this situation where people feel like they cannot trust that he actually believes things and that he's going to do what he says, right? So, you played up the enhanced child tax credit and then you let it expire. You failed to deliver on student loan debt, but you keep saying that you did. Like you didn't do anything to actually strengthen voting rights. We got no real federal policing reform, and so just over and over and over again, you're failing to deliver on these promises. And there is this YouGov tracking poll where they're tracking with registered voters on a monthly basis. Very simple question: do you think Joe Biden is honest and trustworthy or not? In November of 2020, when Joe Biden was elected, almost half of registered voters thought that Joe Biden was honest and trustworthy. April of 2024, last month, when they asked the question, more than half, rather, of registered voters said that they do not think that he is honest and trustworthy. And I think that is the piece that is really plaguing his political situation, is that it doesn't seem like people can trust him because he'll say one thing and then do another. And somebody might say, oh, well, people don't trust Trump. And that is true. Donald Trump, on that same question, 55% of folks think that he is not honest or trustworthy. But if you look at the trend line for Donald Trump, is virtually unchanged from like 2020 to today. The lines are perfectly straight. And for Joe Biden, it's almost reversed, right? And so this trust thing is really bad for him. And the ICC application for warrants just created another situation that I think he just handled the wrong way, because over the last couple of weeks he's been trying to be a little bit tougher with Israel and with Netanyahu, but then this comes out and he said, I was trying to pull up the quote, but he literally said out of his mouth, I heard him say it, there is no genocide in Gaza. And it's one thing to not say that there is another thing to come out and say that there isn't.
Yeah, I think if anything, regardless of what side you're on, I think both sides actually feel this, that he's just equivocating.
Yeah,
I think he's just trying to get through it and until he gets past the election, right? He's not trying to, he's trying to keep both sides pleased, and it's just impossible in this particular, instance. To another point that you made, you don't even want to be comparable when it comes not being believed with Trump. Right. Like you don't want there to be any kind of, you don't want to be within 20 points of his lack of, integrity when it comes to that. So that's a problem within itself. But he hit on something that I think is important, which is false equivalence.
Yeah.
Because I do think still today we need to maintain that I don't think Israel and Hamas are equivalent, right? However, that term false equivalence does a lot of work.
Yeah.
Because, as you know, sometimes the AND campaign is accused of false equivalence, but I think people are making that too broad.
Yeah.
To say that two or more actions or people are wrong isn't to say that they're equivalent. To say that two groups violated international law isn't to say that they violated it to the same extent. So if I steal $200 and Chris steals $200,000, to say we both violated the law isn't really false equivalence. Even though we probably should also say that he violated it more. Does that make sense, Chris?
Yeah.
So like to say that someone violated international law or committed a war crime, that two groups did it or two people did it, isn't to say they did it to the same extent or that they're equivalent. And so I think that in a way that's what's being missed in what he said. Now, I'm not in the position to say whether these charges are exactly true or not. right? But I think we have to realize, not saying that two actions constitute a crime doesn't mean it's the exact same crime, and doesn't mean they're equivalent and to the same extent.
Yeah. And I think that, the International Criminal Court is in a little bit of a catch-22 when it comes to folks who are going to defend Israel no matter what. Because if you don't bring charges against Hamas, then people are going to say, well, how could you bring charges against Israeli leaders and not even bring charges against the leaders of Hamas? But then when you bring the charges against the leaders of Hamas, you open the door to this conversation about false equivalency, and that false equivalency score cuts both ways, in my opinion, because Hamas is a terrorist group and not a state, not the only democracy in the region and all these types of things. There's a higher standard, right, for a recognized state and than there is for a terrorist group, right? So if you hold the position that Hamas is nothing but a terrorist group, then you certainly don't want to insinuate with your false equivalency conversation that Israel is at liberty to do any and everything that Hamas would do, because Israel, of course, is not a terrorist group. Israel is a democracy, is a state that's functioning and recognized in the world. So I think that false equivalency conversation, it sort of misses the point. I don't think that charging both even insinuates that they are somehow equivalent. But when you bring that conversation, I do think you have to then have the conversation also about what is expected of a democracy and a sort of member of this rules-based international order versus what would be expected from a terrorist group.
Yeah. So it's gonna be moving forward to see what happens with this. I'm in agreement with you. It's not like they're actually gonna arrest Netanyahu and take him to jail, right? They don't have that type of jurisdiction, but it is a statement that's being made, and for Norway, Ireland, and Spain to come out and say that they recognize a Palestinian state says something about how Israel is looking to the world, and really how the U.S. is looking to the world in this regard. So I just pray that we're thoughtful, compassionate, and honest in how we deal with this moving forward, because it hasn't been a great look up until this point. Well, we got to go and get off to our other premium episode. As always, Ann Camp, we love you, appreciate you being here with us. There's a cross that neither political conservatism nor progressivism is fit to bear. There's a civic hearing in need of faithful witnesses who love social justice and won't surrender the truth to be loved by the world. Politic with the boldness and compassion of Jesus Christ. Until next time, Ann Camp.
Dear Lord, pay for my sins, Lord. I'm black as heaven. Amen.